All right, so get this. You want to unlock some of those like powerful phrases in English, right? That's what we're doing today.
Cool.
We're taking like a deep dive into these expressions
Okay.
that make you sound like you really know what you're talking about.
Right.
And they give you a glimpse into the culture behind the words.
Absolutely.
So you gave us a bunch of material, and we've kind of distilled it down to the good stuff, focusing on Armageddon,
All right.
cost an arm and a leg,
Uh-huh.
cry wolf,
And okay.
over the moon.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
What I think is so fascinating about language is how it reflects not just our history, but also our values and even anxieties.
Oh.
You can learn a lot about a culture by examining its idioms.
I like that. Okay, so let's jump right into it with Armageddon.
Okay.
I'm curious, when you hear that word,
Yeah.
what's the first thing that pops into your mind?
For many, Armageddon evokes a sense of impending doom, often on a global scale.
Right.
And it's not surprising considering its origins. The word itself comes from the book of Revelation,
Okay.
where it refers to the location of a final decisive battle between good and evil.
So it's not just any disaster, it's the ultimate showdown.
Right.
But it's interesting how the word's meaning has expanded over time.
Right.
It's not just confined to like religious context anymore.
It's true.
We hear it used in discussions about climate change,
Absolutely.
political upheaval, even pandemic.
Exactly. It's become a powerful way to emphasize the severity of a situation, to highlight the potential for widespread catastrophe.
Okay.
And what's striking is how the use of Armageddon has become more secular.
Okay.
Over time, reflecting perhaps a shift in cultural anxieties.
Wow. That's a really insightful observation.
Thanks.
It's like we've moved from fearing divine judgment to fearing the consequences of our own action.
Yes.
Do you think that's why words like apocalypse, catastrophe, and doomsday have become more common in our everyday language?
It's certainly possible. These words all convey a sense of impending disaster.
Yeah.
But there are subtle differences in their connotations.
Okay.
Apocalypse often implies a complete and irreversible end, while catastrophe suggests a sudden and devastating event. Doomsday carries a more fatalistic tone.
Okay.
Almost a sense of inevitability.
It's amazing how language can offer such a nuanced palette of words to express such a weighty concept.
It is.
And the choice of which word to use can be very deliberate, influencing the tone and impact of the message.
Absolutely.
I'm definitely going to be paying more attention to those word choices from now on.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit with our next phrase.
Right.
Cost an arm and a leg.
Okay.
Now tell me you haven't winced at a price tag
Oh, yeah.
and thought, this is going to cost me an arm and a leg.
I think we've all been there.
Right.
This idiom is a classic example of hyperbole,
Oh.
using exaggeration for humorous effect.
Right.
It's a way of expressing just how outrageous a price is, but in a way that's relatable and even a bit funny.
What I find interesting is that this phrase, unlike Armageddon, is relatively recent.
Yeah.
Our sources say it originated in America after World War II.
Yes. And there's some debate about its exact origins.
Okay.
Some believe it's related to the high cost of prosthetics for wounded soldiers.
Okay.
While others link it to the practice of portrait painters, charging more for paintings that included limbs.
Interesting.
Regardless of its precise origin,
Right.
the phrase has clearly resonated with people, becoming a staple in our everyday language.
I wonder why it stuck around.
Yeah.
Why not just say something is expensive?
Well, cost an arm and a leg adds a visceral element to the idea of expensiveness.
Right.
It conjures up an image of actual sacrifice, suggesting that you're giving up something valuable to acquire this item.
Right.
That makes it much more impactful than simply saying something is expensive.
Yeah.
Or even very expensive.
That makes sense. It taps into our innate understanding of value and loss.
Right.
It's like saying, is this thing really worth sacrificing a part of myself for?
Exactly.
And I think that's why it resonates so strongly even today.
Yeah, I agree. It's fascinating how certain idioms like cost an arm and a leg transcend cultural boundaries and have equivalents in other languages.
Oh, really?
For instance, in Spanish, they say vale un ojo de la cara, which translates to it's worth an eye from the face.
Wow, that's even more intense. Like they're saying you'd have to sacrifice part of your vision to afford it.
Yeah.
It makes an arm and a leg sound almost reasonable.
Right.
What about other languages? Do they have similarly colorful expressions?
Absolutely. In German, for example, they say, das kostet ein Schweinegeld.
Okay.
which literally means that costs pig money.
Pig money.
Imagine trying to explain that one to someone
Yeah.
who's never heard it before.
I can only imagine the confused looks. I'm so curious now.
Yeah.
What would be the cultural context
Yeah.
behind pig money?
Well, it likely stems from the fact that pigs were once considered valuable livestock.
Okay.
So saying something costs pig money implies a significant expense. It reflects a time when bartering and trading livestock were commonplace.
That's so interesting. It really highlights how idioms can offer a window into a culture's history and values.
It does.
It makes you realize that language isn't just about words.
Right.
It's about storytelling and shared experiences.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about idioms that express extreme costs
Right.
and pure joy.
Yes.
But what about that middle ground, those everyday situations where things aren't exactly going our way?
Ah, yes. Life is full of those moments.
And sometimes we might even be tempted to, well, cry wolf. It's easy to fall into the trap of exaggerating a problem.
Sure.
Or complaining about minor inconveniences, especially when we're feeling stressed or frustrated.
It's a natural human tendency to want to be heard.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel like we need to amplify our concerns to get people to pay attention.
Right.
But as we learned from Aesop's fable, that strategy can backfire spectacularly.
Absolutely. And in a world of constant information overload, it's even more crucial to be mindful of how we present our concerns.
Precisely. Nobody wants to be that person who's always sounding the alarm,
Right.
especially if it turns out to be a false alarm.
What?
Consider the story of the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and his infamous Peace for Our Time declaration.
Oh.
After meeting with Hitler in 1938,
Oh, yeah.
his repeated assurances that war could be avoided ultimately eroded public trust.
Right.
When Germany invaded Poland just a year later.
That's a powerful example of how crying wolf on a global scale can have devastating consequences.
It
It
can.
makes you realize that credibility is a precious commodity.
It is.
Easily lost and incredibly difficult to regain.
Indeed. And it's not just limited to world leaders. Think about a company that repeatedly hypes up products
Yeah.
that fail to deliver.
Okay.
They might see a short-term bump in sales,
Right.
but in the long run, they'll lose customer trust and damage their reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what happened with some tech companies that overpromised on the capabilities of their AI products.
Right.
The initial excitement quickly turned to skepticism
Yeah.
when the reality didn't match the hype.
Like the boy who cried wolf. Once you've lost credibility, it's incredibly difficult to earn it back.
It is.
It makes you think about how important it is to be truthful and reliable, both in our personal and professional lives.
It's a valuable lesson to learn early on.
Right.
We're constantly building and maintaining our credibility through our actions and our words.
So how do we strike that balance? How can we be assertive without crying wolf?
That's a great question. First, focus on being specific and factual when describing a problem.
Okay.
Avoid using overly dramatic language or making sweeping generalizations.
That makes sense. Stick to the facts and let the facts speak for themselves.
Exactly. Second, consider your audience in the context of the situation.
Right.
What's the appropriate level of urgency?
Okay.
Is this something that requires immediate attention?
Yeah.
Or can it wait?
Sometimes a little perspective can go a long way.
And finally, be willing to listen to feedback and adjust your approach if necessary.
Well,
If someone tells you that you're crying wolf, don't get defensive. Instead, ask for clarification and be open to changing your communication style.
so it all boils down to being self-aware and respectful of others and knowing when to speak up and when to listen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, it's okay to be passionate and advocate for what you believe in,
Yeah.
but do so in a way that builds trust and maintains your credibility. Now, shall we move on to our final phrase, the one that evokes pure joy?
Oh, yes. Let's talk about over the moon. That's a phrase I could definitely use more of in my life.
I agree.
It's so evocative, so full of pure, unadulterated happiness. But I have to admit, I'm curious about its origins. It seems so whimsical, almost childlike.
It does, doesn't it? And its origins are indeed rooted in something quite whimsical. English nursery rhymes.
Oh, okay.
Remember the rhyme, hey diddle diddle, where the cow jumps over the moon?
Of course. I can't believe I didn't make that connection.
Uh-huh.
It's amazing how something so simple can become ingrained in our language and take on such powerful meaning.
It just goes to show that even seemingly nonsensical imagery can spark our imaginations and evoke strong emotions. And in this case, the image of leaping over the moon perfectly captures that feeling of boundless joy and exhilaration.
I could just picture someone jumping for joy, their happiness so intense that it propels them over the moon. It's such a vivid and memorable image.
And it's a great example of how language can be both descriptive and evocative. It's not just about conveying information.
Yeah.
It's about creating an emotional connection with the listener.
It feels like we've journeyed through the whole English language today.